This is the Twisted Tunisian Washcloth. It's a dense Tunisian crochet washcloth with a distinctive texture that we've highlighted by working in contrast stripes throughout the centre square. It also has an open loopy edging which simultaneously creates a top stitched look along the edge of the border. And we've used picots at 3 of the corners to sharpen the look of the square, and on the 4th corner we've made an optional hanging loop. If you don't like to have a hanging loop on your washcloth, you can simply make another picot here. They're made in the same way. Let's see how the cloth's made. To make the Tunisian Twisted Cloth, I will be using the Drops Paris cotton yarn. This is an Aran or worsted weight yarn, and it's got quite a nice twist to it so it doesn't split easily, so that's why I've chosen it for this project. It's quite easy to split the stitches when working Tunisian twisted stitch, and so a non-splitty yarn is quite handy for that. Now, although this is a Tunisian crochet project, you don't need to use a Tunisian crochet hook for it. You can use a Tunisian crochet hook, and that could be one that has a wire on the end, or it could be one that has a longer handle. Or you could use a regular crochet hook that has a straight stem, like this or like this. What you don't want though is a regular crochet hook that has a wide handle and only a short neck for putting the stitches on, and that's because in Tunisian crochet you can have quite a few stitches on the hook at the same time. So this length of hook is fine, this length of hook is fine, even this length of hook which has a slightly shorter stem before the handle is fine too. If you use a regular crochet hook, what you might want to do is put a hairband or an elastic band or something similar on the end of it. So you could do something like that, and then your stitches will be on here and they won't be able to slide off the end of the hook. When working Tunisian twisted simple stitch, you need to work the stitch into the row below in a slightly different way to normal. Normally you'd insert the tip of the hook into your stitch. However, with Tunisian twisted simple stitch, you'll be inserting the hook from the tooth side of the hook into the next stitch. And so for that reason, you might like to pick a hook that has quite a sharp pointy tooth to it. And for that reason, I would prefer this hook, which has a more pointed tooth, over this hook, which has quite a rounded and shallow tooth. I'm going to be using this pink yarn as colour 1 in the project, so I'm going to be starting by working 20 chains, and to keep my chains nice and loose, I'm going to pull the whole head of the hook through without tightening it, rather than just pulling it through in that direction, which makes a slightly tighter chain. So let's make 20 of those chains, 19 and 20. So now I'm going to pick up a loop in the back of each of those chains. I'll skip the first one as I already have a loop in that chain, the one that's already on the hook, and I like to work into the back bumps of the chains, but it's absolutely fine to work into the side or around two strands in the chain, or wherever you'd normally work. I'm just going to pull up a loop through each of those, slide the hook through, pull up the loop until I have 20 loops on my hook. 19 and 20. And then I'm going to be working the standard return pass for Tunisian crochet on all rows throughout the project. So the standard return pass is to put the yarn around the hook and pull it through one of the loops on the hook, and then pull the yarn round and pull it through 2 loops on the hook. And we'll be doing that, pulling the yarn round and pulling through 2 loops on the hook all the way to the end. A nice tip for changing colour in Tunisian crochet is when you have your final 2 loops on the hook, use the next colour and pull it through 2 of them. It's not absolutely essential to do that for this project because we'll be working a border anyway, so this end will be covered up, but it's a good habit to get into. So we've got our first stitch on the hook now for the second row. That's why we've made it in the blue colour. Next, we're going to start working the twisted Tunisian simple stitch. So we'll pull the hook through in the opposite direction to usual, and then we'll pull the yarn through that loop, and you can see how it twists the stitch below. Let's do that on the next one. Here we can see the vertical stitch below, and we'll pull the tooth of the hook through that stitch in the opposite direction to the way we'd usually work and pull the loop up. You can see now why we needed a much bigger hook than we'd normally use for the yarn. You can see those twisted stitches there, which is what's going to create the nice texture of the cloth. Keep doing that all the way to the end of the row, taking care to keep your tension loose and even. When you get to the very last stitch, we can work the normal end of the row stitch for Tunisian crochet, which means to pass the hook straight through with these 2 loops of yarn, 2 strands of yarn on the side, and pull the yarn through. So what you'll want to do now is your return pass. So again, pull through 1 loop on the first stitch and 2 loops until you get to the end. And remember, if you want to do that colour change, leave 2 loops on the hook to pull your next colour yarn through. So now with just 2 loops on the hook, I want to switch back to the pink yarn. And this time it's a little bit more secure, so I don't have to worry about holding it with my little finger. Just switch that yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops. And now I've got 1 loop on the hook, which is ready for my next row. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing in the next row as I did in the previous row. I'll be working the whole row in Twisted Tunisian simple stitch and then working a standard return pass on the way back. When I get to the end, I'll switch colours on those last 2 stitches again, and then I'll repeat that until my cloth is square. So here we go with the pink. And this tightens up the row below it, as well as creating the twist in the stitch. It's not quite as easy to see in the dark blue yarn, but you can definitely see it in the pink yarn here. So we'll be creating a striped cloth with the twisty texture of Twisted Tunisian simple stitch. If you have a stitch that you can't get your hook into, maybe you pulled it a little bit tight on the row below and your hook doesn't want to go into it, lift it a bit by pushing the hook through in the usual direction, and then you'll find it's easier to get into. You could also try switching hook sizes if you find a lot of your stitches are too tight to get the hook into. So this is the center of the cloth, partway through being worked up. I think we're going to do this so it has 17 stripes in total, 8 of the blue and 9 of the pink. I just wanted to give you a couple of little tips that I find handy when working on Tunisian crochet, and in particular the Tunisian twisted stitch. When you work the start of each row, you can often find that the first stitch becomes quite big and loose, and you don't really want it to be on the end, particularly as we've done it in a contrast colour to the row below. It would be fairly obvious. So if you want to, just after starting each row, you can pull up the yarn like that and get it nice and even whenever it's bigger than the size of the hook itself, and that will give you a more even edge along this side. So here we are with our 17 rows complete. As you can see, the last row is still very loose because it hasn't been tightened up by working the next row into it. So the next row is going to be the start of the border, and the border we're going to start working in colour 2. So I'll change the colour of the yarn in exactly the same way as I would if I were going to start another row. There we go, we've pulled that through there. And then we're going to work a chain to rise to the height of the next row. We are going to be working UK double crochets or US single crochets for our border, and we are going to be working into each of these loops in the same way as we've worked the Twisted Tunisian simple stitch. So rather than poking the tip of our hook through, we're going to pull the tooth of our hook through. Then in the same way as we'd work a regular crochet stitch, we'll pull through a loop and then pull through the 2 loops on the hook. So let's do that all the way across. Insert as if for Twisted Tunisian simple stitch, pull up a loop and then pull the yarn through the 2 loops on the hook. And then on the very end stitch, we're going to work again as we did before, with just the 2 strands on the side of the stitch through the hook, and again work our crochet stitch there. We'll work a single chain for the corner, and then we need to work along the row end stitches. Now, although we've already worked in this stitch here, we've worked on it for this side, we also need to work on it as one of our row end stitches. So we'll work a second stitch in here, and these are just regular UK double or US single crochet stitches. So work one of those in each of the stitches along the row end. Now, as we've worked into the last row end stitch here, we're going to make another chain one for the corner, and then we're going to work a stitch in each of the foundation chains we made at the start of the project, and that includes again the one that we've just worked through the row end stitch. So we've worked through here, and we're now going to work again through pretty much the same spot to complete our first stitch of the next side. So we'll work through each of these in turn. You'll remember at the start I said to try and keep them fairly loose, and this will make it a lot more comfortable as you work along this side. So this is now our third side, so we'll continue working until we reach the end. And here we're working into the last stitch of the foundation chain. We'll work a 1 chain corner, and then we're going to work into the same stitch on its side, because it's also the first row end stitch of the next side. So again, we're going to work into the row end stitches, and they look very similar to the ones on the other side. You're just working through with 2 loops on your hook, just as you would it with working into a regular crochet stitch. So this pink row, that's my last row of the center square. So I'm going to work 1 chain here for the corner, just as I did for all of the others, and then I'll work into the first stitch of this round with a slip stitch just to close this first edging round. So there's our first edging round complete, and we're ready now to start the second edging round. Now, if you count the stitches that you've made across the sides, you'll have 17, because you had 17 rows. Now, you might expect to have 20 stitches across here because you started with 20 stitches in your Tunisian crochet. However, in regular crochet, you will have only 19 stitches, and that's because our first stitch in Tunisian crochet is always the loop that we start with on the hook, and so we haven't actually worked into that one here. So we will have 19 stitches here and 19 stitches across the foundation chain at the bottom. So don't think you've got them wrong if you find that. Here you can also fasten off colour 2, which you've used for the first edging round, and we'll be working with colour 1 again in the second edging round. To start working the edging, we're going to put our hook through the chain space we made for this corner just before the slip stitch, which was our final stitch, and we'll pull the yarn through there. We're going to work a 3 chain picot, 1, 2, 3 chains, and then we'll slip stitch back in the 3rd chain from the hook in the back bump. 1, 2, and 3. There we go. So that's our first corner complete. We'll be doing that in each of the 4 corners. So having worked the picot, you're going to need to take care to miss the chain that we worked to bring ourselves up to the height of the first border row. So that chain there, it was just a beginning chain. It's not one of the stitches. You can see this is the first stitch worked into our Tunisian crochet. So this is where we're going to work our first stitch, and our first stitch is a slip stitch worked around the back post. So we'll start from the back, push through to the front, go back to the back around the post of that stitch and pull through around the post and through the loop on the hook. Now we're going to work 3 chains. We'll miss the next stitch and we'll work another back post slip stitch around the next stitch, 3 chains, miss a stitch, back post slip stitch. And that's what we're going to be doing all along, 3 chains, miss a stitch, back post slip stitch. And because we have an odd number of stitches in the first row of our border on the top side here, our final stitch of this row will end up being a back post slip stitch worked around this stitch. So now we're going to slip stitch back into our chain space that creates the corner, and here we'll work another 3 chain picot, 1, 2, 3 chains, slip stitch in the back loop of the 3rd chain from the hook. And now we're going to work across again, and we'll work exactly the same pattern. We'll work a back loop slip stitch into the first of our stitches, and you can easily recognize that it's worked into the first row of Tunisian crochet. We'll work 3 chains, we'll miss this stitch, and now we're going to work into the next stitch with a back post slip stitch. And so the sides are worked exactly the same as the top. In each corner we'll be working a 3 chain picot, and then we'll be working this border of back post slip stitch, 3 chains, back post slip stitch along each side. If you wish, when you get to one of the corners, you can slip stitch in there and make a hanging loop instead of a picot. To do that, you do exactly the same thing, but you work more chains. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I find around 7 chains works well for the hanging loops that I have in my kitchen or bathroom, and then I'll slip stitch back into the back bump of the first chain I made, the 7th chain from the hook, and then I'm ready to work my next back post slip stitch around the first stitch of the next side. And there we go, that's how my hanging loop looks. And there we've finished our last back post slip stitch, and that completes the 2nd row of our border and our hanging loop. So all we need to do is close that round off with a slip stitch in the first slip stitch you made in the corner chain space here. So there we go, fasten the yarn off. So here we have our washcloth with its hanging loop. It needs the ends woven in. And try to weave in the yarn along a section that's the same colour as the yarn you're weaving in. So I'm trying to weave in along this pink row. I like to split the yarn as I work through it, so I'm only taking a few strands of each thread of yarn. And then I'll work back in the same direction after making sure it's fairly loose, and also making sure I'm not going in at exactly the same point. And a little trim. So here's our finished twisted Tunisian cloth. You can increase the number of stitches to any even number. You want an even number of stitches to make sure that the edging will work out. So if you're not doing the edging, you could actually work any number of chains in your foundation chain to start the Tunisian crochet centre square. You could adjust by making a hanging loop or not. You could work a different kind of edging if you wanted to. You could work it all in a solid colour if you preferred, or just use more subtle colours or whatever goes with your colour scheme. And I hope you'll enjoy making it.